everyone. I think we can start right now. So thank you for participating in this CPR-CSH workshop. We have today the pleasure to welcome Nicolas Bottes. Why the pleasure? Because Nicolas is currently affiliated with IFP, French Institute of Pondichéry, which is a sister center, research center of CSH, which you might know is my institute. But you're not going to talk about the research you are currently performing in India. You're going to go back to the fieldworks you realized in Brazil some years back. So you have 45 minutes more or less, and then we can proceed to a round of questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for kindly inviting me to this seminar, especially Partha, Mukta, Marie-Hélène, and Olivier. And when Marie-Hélène suggested to invite me here, I offered her two options. And the first was an ongoing project, which meant I'm coming back to India after a long period of absence, and I want to go back for my first to rework and to see from another lenses the work I've been undertaking on the politics of heritage in Udaipur. And but she told me, no, it would be better to present a case study. So I'm presenting something which is the last field work I undertook under two research programs. Was under setup, social exclusion, territories and urban processes, and another one which is closely linked with the subject I'm here for, which is about illegalism, informal politics, and called Inverse. I will present this a bit later. So this presentation, as said, it's kind of important for me because I try to articulate the question I will present here with works, especially on the question of urban politics, the question of illegalism or illegal practices and informal politics, and the question of economy. After my PhD in India, which was around tourism and the politics of heritage, I've been shifting my investigation in Rio, involving a few case studies which were analyzed in comparative dimension between them and with the field work in India. So I would like you to keep in mind, the thing is that I'm presenting something about Rio, but as an invitation also to think about some cross perspective with some example in India. So I would like today to focus on a locality I've been studying at the micro scale. I insist on the idea of micro scale because it has some methodological implication on the port zone of Rio de Janeiro, an area which has been for long declining and recently passed a brutal movement of revitalization or requalification. I will briefly precise the general context of these processes in the course of this talk. The case study addressed two main issues. This is the port area of Rio de Janeiro, is involving 5 million square meters. So the talk addressed two main issues which are addressed as two entangled process in the context of fast changing contemporary cities. The first is about the political and moral recognition of places initiated by debates over cultural heritage assets. It relates to the strength of both identity urban movements and heritage in the process of resignification of memory and landmarking or placemaking. The second articulated issue is more directly involved with the role of informal politics. I call here illegalism, but more broadly informal politics, in the arena of the so-called urban governance or urban government, in a context where heritage landmarking takes place in an area of strong land speculation. Here, the claim for identity recognition is laid in this example by strong social movements, by cultural activists, and by religious practitioners. They are closely relating and questioning in very different ways the question of heritage and its significance, but are at the same time entangled to contemporary urban dynamics in the sense that, in that sense, they attract various interests, being from real estate developers, politicians, technical public agents, middle-class citizens, and sometimes criminal groups. So I will present the scales of the conflict. I will focus on analyzing the articulation between this territorial claim I will clearly refer to, and the question of memory, and place landmarking around the question of memory. And I will, within this context, address two related issues, one related to a court case in law, and the second part, I try to characterize and present the set of cross practices that this places is concentrated. But for that, let me please, for a few seconds, a few minutes, present the general orientation of my research line, which also touches upon methodological questions. I first conducted, from 2005, field work in a favela called Morro da Providência, which means the hill of the Providence, which is an informal settlement or slum, located at the heart of the port zone of Rio. May remember. You can see very badly maybe, there is a set of hills here. I don't know if it's working here. Can you follow this line? This is a complex of small hills that has been preserved to preserve the new constructing modern business district in the 19th century and the 20th century. Urban reform were constructing a modern CBD here through a very major avenue called Avenue Getúlio Vargas, one of the major dictators of in the 60s in Brazil, starting from the 40s, therefore isolating this port area of the city, historically inhabited by poor people, descendants of Africans, Afro-Brazilian origins. Then the hill complex was rapidly occupied by informal settlements. So this where I've been conducting my fieldwork for a period of 10 years. I've been working on how the state's intervention were addressing to the specificities of the locality, being a favela or being a popular neighborhood, what kind of urban policy they were applying, urban projects, urban schemes they were addressing to the specificity of a neighborhood being a slum or not. And in the meanwhile, I've been addressing how, this is the Morro da Providência, I've been trying to understand how this part of the city has been slowly involving a kind of concentrated of the whole urban politics, urban schemes conducted in the city. So here is the partial chronology of the urban policies implemented in the area. You can just, I won't detail all of them, of course, but what is important to follow is that from the 1980s, especially after 85, when Brazil is coming back to democracy after a period of dictatorship, it also articulated very clearly urban policies to neoliberal, so-called neoliberal orientation, therefore opening urban politics into the financing, the founding of international agencies, among them the Inter-American Bank, and under the World Bank orientations. So what happened in the specificity of this area and in the favela I was working? The first is the slow interaction between urban policies, urban schemes of rehabilitation, upgrading schemes, you could say, and heritage-based projects. More and more, from the 90s and 2000, urban projects were articulated with somehow question of memory, identity, heritage, tourism. This is very common. That's why I was telling you maybe we should think on a projected basis with some other example in the world. But without detailing this project, it's very important to mention that all of them are encompassing a strong component on heritage and tourism, attesting for me that the main interest of the public policy was not to provide basic service to the poor, but rather integrate this area, to the current trends and flow of the neoliberal urban policies, very much in the case of Rio, associated to a politics of mega events we could follow up to the Olympic Games in 2016, defined after Barcelona's model, or the model of Barcelona. Of course, Barcelona played a very important place, as starting in the early 2000s, after Manuel Castel and Jordi Borja were called by the mayor of Rio to implement an expert document defining the strategy of urban policy, urban development of Rio, including, of course, the same recipe than in Barcelona, a museum, which is now located on the city, down the hill of the favela, city of Samba, an open sky or open air museum of the favela, within the favela, presented as the last testimony of the 19th century housing facilities of the poor, which is also involving some heritage issues, I would say no. All this in a perspective to transform and to turn the favela into a tourism object. That's the place where Marie-Hélène knows very well, because that's the place we were describing for lunch. On the top of the hill, a small church called Capella do Cruzeiro, which is planning to be rehabilitated from 2010 onward as a colonial church, therefore hosting tourism and all that. Okay. Then, being interested in how these policies and schemes were articulated, I slowly followed the way people were reacting to this project, appropriating them, or trying to contest them slowly in the context of what is slowly appearing as not only an opposition between public policies and residents, but by a complex set of actors I was trying to characterize. Then, by moving slowly from beyond this favela, I've been interested in another place located very nearby. Both places, the favela I was working and the popular neighborhood I will present now, share common features, being geographical and historical, and they share also recent dynamics of inclusion in the heart of the Maya urban operation happening in the port zone. In terms of methods, as I was working since like 8 years on the political games in the favela, I had to go out. I had to address to more general perspective on the stakes, the powers, the way urban policies were contested and addressed by residents or by civil or political society. Then, in terms of methods, then I extend what Andreas Glaser referred to as the extended cases method. In other terms, I've been slowly involved in a processual analysis based on a 10 years trajectory of fieldwork. Another context could help better understand. I don't know if it's very clear. So I've been then, which is, you can say, extend the extended case method to address a more processual analysis than a monographical analysis, instead of staying in a limited and place-specific, which could help only doing a grounded ethnography. This definitively provided some more general perspective on the local fabrics of politics, not only opposing public policy and civil society or political society movements, but addressing the complex set of power. Then what I did is I was trying in the favela to follow the political itineraries of local leaders, the way they were slowly, by contentious, by mobilization processes, by participating to the local political games, by negotiating with some actors, they were slowly entering in politics. So I've been following individual trajectories of politics, most of them leading to this other place. So I was wondering why these people who are political leaders attached, associated, slum dwellers associations, local leaders from the neighborhood, how come they go out, they go beyond their own neighborhood to go into politics. So that's why this locality is understood as a case study. Then I needed a framework to understand that. So first is a processual analysis of local leaders' trajectory into politics, to understand in which ways they were entering into politics, to which extent, in what kind of field, with what kind of skills, resources, specializations, what kind of limits also, because they were coming from a slum. They were slum local leaders. They were not formal city local leaders. They were not civil society. They were political society, if you take the word of Partha Chatterjee, which could be discussed also. And then, interestingly, I was at that time working in a project around the question of informal politics with many other colleagues. And we were trying to address, with the collective, the ways we could cross our fieldwork, cross our field of investigation, going out, trying to go beyond the categories of North and South, or global North and global South, which I find very interestingly difficult to handle, and trying to address what is urban governance when it faces urban informal politics. And should we understand urban governance only through the lenses of the norm, only through a normative way, or should we address the complex net of powers interacting to build the actual way urban politics are being implemented? But once you say that, the limits are there. If you focus on only the corruption, transaction, illegal transaction, informal transaction, then what is left of the norm of the urban governance? That's the main question. So, in the locality of Morro da Conceição, in the Pedra do Sal, I will now present, we undertook a collective work, starting from an ethnography, and slowly following through a localized or situated ethnography of a conflict. That's why I call the first part of this presentation, the first part of the case study, the Pedra do Sal, which is the place I will present, place and stage for conflictive production of memory. The stage has here two senses. The stage as a place where are performed social games, social political games, and a stage where the scholar is also here to address the understanding of the social processes observing. So, let me go to the case studies now after this too long introduction. The Pedra do Sal is a place concentrating a dispute. It's basically, in material sense, a small square established around a big granite stone. I don't know if you can see here, a big granite stone called Pedra do Sal. The name meaning salt stone relates to a place where salt was stocked after coming from the sea by ships accosting to the nearby Bay of Guanabara in the 18th and 19th century. This place is one of the neuralgic points of the historical part of Rio, very close to the port, where launched the immigrants from the whole world, which literally made Brazil, but also in colonial times, where slaves freshly arrived from the African continent before and after the abolition of slavery in 1888. In less than a century, an estimation of 700,000 slaves directly debarked to Rio, making it the major port of slave trafficking in the world at that time. The Pedra do Sal has become from then on an important meeting point of the black resisting community, and is also a concentration of religious rituals and cultural performance. Most of these slaves were later working as dockers in the harbor, a small ball located in the square mentions it very clearly. You can see here. It's also known as a place of Afro-Brazilian worship. It counted many of Afro-Brazilian temples called terreiros, where people perform candomblé and umbanda rituals, disappearing all over the 20th centuries, going to the peripheries. This memory, and more widely the tracks of African presence, were for a long time a forbidden history, only referred in samba songs, and revitalized by a group called Sons of Gandhi, in reference to Gandhi. This group was associating the history of the place to a mythical past, peaceful past, but a place of resistance, silent resistance, on the historical discrimination of black people, and slowly against the urban destruction of on this part of the city. But the end of dictatorship in Brazil opened new democratic expressions leading to constitutional rights, and slowly showed the emergence of identity activism spreading up the country. In 1987, local activist group called Community of Remanent Quilombo claimed the State Institute of Cultural Heritage to protect the place, the Pedra do Sal. First positive response of the state, recognition from then on the Pedra do Sal as a national and cultural testimony of Brazilian Africanity. They decided further to identify it as a quilombo. The term refers precisely to, I quote, space historically occupied by emancipated or liberated slaves to whom was recognized during the colonial period in the rural areas of Brazil, a collective ownership of the land. Both decisions were made without any preliminary consideration on its possible consequence to shift constitutional rights happening in the rural areas in an urban context where the land is becoming precious. As a matter of fact, an important set of buildings and plots located in the immediate vicinity of the square is owned by a religious institution, the Catholic Venerable Third Order of San Francisco of Penance. I will refer from now as the church, which is founded in 1990 in Rio, having a very important place in the heart of the city. And you can see here the properties of the church. So the decision of protecting, recognizing this place as an African or an Afro-Brazilian memory, of course, convinced the church to start increasing the rental prices and soon engage with an eviction process against the current tenants who could not afford such increase, most of them being from low-income families surviving from social pension. The official argument of the church to suddenly offer what could be a strategy of land speculation, she answered that she needed space to expand educational and welfare projects in the area. Of course, such decision is also related on the ongoing valorization of real estate in the area, which started slowly in the 90s to be very important from 2000 onward. I don't have time to get to data, but it's the price of the land in Rio was multiplied by 100 in 5 years from 2000 to 2005, and then it continued to 2005 to 2010. In the following years, more than 40 families renting places from the church were either evicted or relocated from their rented house. But in the context of strong involvement of several Afro-Brazilian activists with housing social movement, mixing identity movement with social housing movement, they were becoming very strong, and they decided to squat the properties. The reaction of the church is rapid and brutal. Claims started to denounce that some representatives from the church were persecuting people, relaying a brutal discourse against black minority, which according to them were not representative, not representing anything in the area, were invaders and unknown in the neighborhood, unlike the other immigrants of Spanish and Portuguese origins, but Catholic. In fact, soon after the landmarking of the Pedro do Sal as an heritage asset, a strong movement of territorial claim emerged, soon to gather together housing activists, popular culture supporters, and social movements of all kinds around what is slowly becoming a space of resistance of black identity and population. Some comments then criticized strongly what they called an exaggerated proliferation of black reference in progenies. Let's now focus on the foreground arena of the dispute a bit, that is the sphere of the law, from the federal level. In the early 90s, the association created by Quilombo's activists requires the federal court to implement Article 68 of the Constitution, which specifies clearly the possibility of recognition of ethnic territories designated by the term Quilombo through anthropological and historical studies. That welcomes academia. The degree of application of this article underlines the eventuality of both dispossession and land regularization, allowing a collective use and ownership of the land of the Quilombo, subject to the official approbation of President of Republic. On this basis, in 2005, a certificate of auto-recognition of the residents is delivered. The document is co-signed by the community leaders and by several members of the movement, who become, therefore, officially, I quote, descendant of slaves of the valley of the South Paraiba, which is the river, and historical resident of the harbor zone. This is implicitly recognized the African origin of this part of the city and lends legitimacy to their supposed representatives or legacy. But at this stage, the law cannot go further towards any regularization or delimitation of a perimeter of land. No tangible track of historical implantation of the claimers in the neighborhood could be officially attested. Slave descendants appear then constructed, self-represented, which is not a problem in itself, but question the very norms on which a legal decision of justice is based when it meets the urban context and the urban rules and regulations. So the notion of Quilombo is in itself very ambiguous, and it's relating to a double conception of territory. A first, considered as an ethnic territory, highly memorial and symbolic, whose existence relies on the advocacy of historical and anthropological expertise, academics, relying on constitutional rights. On this aspect, federal prosecutor Luciana Job, here quoted, informed that talking about Quilombo is talking about ethnic identity, conceived as something politically constructed. According to her, the Quilombo is also an object which belongs to the sphere of interpretation, hermeneutic, which cannot be only be analyzed through a positivist interpretation. As such, according to her, to achieve the terms of constitution, the law is in itself not enough, and requires an ideological position which may produce conflict. She clearly states that it is a fact to fight against all the new discrimination, but it's something else to engage a procedure of land regularization and disapprobation. A second conception of the territory is a material one, focusing on the land and its ownership, through the cases here opposing the church and the Quilombo, which also relate to the question of who remains or become the owner, the representative, legitimate to acquire or appropriate this land. Pedro do Sal is the very first reclamation of this type located in an urban context, where very little tangible element attest of the presence of slavery, of any tracks. For the law, then, the execution of juridical referential is submitted to interpretation based on a resemantization of the notion of Quilombo. Therefore, it depends upon the current political struggle which could validate or not the landmarking defining the Quilombo. Until today, the dispute is pending as not any part can prove a present, an actual, and official ownership of the land. Even the church, who's claiming having acquired, inherited this place from Don Pedro Emperor, is unable to find the proper document. So the law is stuck. But slowly, so juridical fragility. But slowly, from 2009 onwards, a very tiny, concentrated conflict shifted to another scale under a dynamic of relating to three concomitant processes. The first is identity movement, as we saw, landmarking strategies, and some legal and illegal ways to understand the law. People were producing facts and tracks, using anthropologists to produce, to attest the historical proof of slavery, so things like that. But the second scale is also a local scale, as in 2009, the major urban operation of urban Brazil is launched in the area, where a dispute opposing two parties is rapidly, fast engaging the question of landmarking and urban strategies at the scale of the metropolis. And also, of course, at the national scale, where the law, the federal court, is also very much questioned for its ability to apply to constitutional rights. This is the case for the Quilombos, the slaves, but also the case for the Indians as Indian American natives. For many, all the question of minority politics. So the rescaling of the conflict is very linked to urban operation Porto Maravilha. Sorry, it's cut because of the font. But the urban qualification of historical center effectively tended to activate a latent tension around ownership of the appropriation of urban land in the whole area. Until then, solving disputes related to inheritance among owners or family members on a very old building were latent due to the common degradation of many of the houses and the very low value of the land. It was not worth going to the court to get back a property. But the situation is rapidly changing in 2009 after the launch of this urban operation. I don't have time to present it, but if you want, we can discuss about that afterward for the people interested. But it entailed 2 billion US dollars over 15 years, attracting private investment, facilitating a flow of capital, and opening up to the private takeover of infrastructure management and public spaces, investment funds, some of them buying highly degraded buildings, even entire streets from 2009. From this time, the urban pressure was very clear, and this highly concerned Pedro do Sal. But where something happened by chance, I should say, most of the people were busy thinking about how they will suffer or benefit from the financing system created in the urban operation, how they will be evicted, or how they will beneficiate from this speculation they couldn't even think about. It happened that in January 2011, works performed under the urban operation excavated the main former slave disembarkation pier 300 meters from the Pedro do Sal was talking about. It was called Valongo Wharf. This pier was built in 1811 and known to be the wharf of slaves, a place where between 500,000 and 1 million slaves landed. They say 700,000, but we don't really know. But since then, till then, this wharf has been covered by an avenue, modern avenue, which also was covered. So the slaves pier you can see here, the Valongo pier, the pier of the slaves here, the stones. And these were excavated at the same time a disembarkation pier called Imperatriz Pier, made when the Imperatriz was coming from Portugal to get married to Imperator of Brazil, Dom Pedro. So then these two piers, two major archaeological elements of the history of this place, were excavated by the contemporary urban operation.
By chance?
By chance. They didn't know, I mean. Soon after archaeologists excavated the site, the Valongo was officially recognized as Afro-descendant heritage by the proper municipality and opened to the public in early 2012 after light layout with archaeological tracks and boards serving as commemorative and memory monuments. There were found the tracks of the slavery. Under the vigor of movements of archaeology, academy, anthropology, strongly supporting identity movement, in July 2017, very recently, the place that was declared Site of Conscience for UNESCO in UNESCO World Heritage List. The recognition of another place in the area of Afro-Brazilian memory, much site de conscience slave, site of conscience by the UNESCO. I give you the reference of slavery. It's part of an international network of sites of memory of slavery, site of conscience. So this recognition, much more ambitious than the Pedra do Sal, is very clear. It's also from another cultural resonance, and it's also very helpful. It acted as an activator of the ongoing conflict around Pedra do Sal. Both the heads of the Quilombo movement and the municipality could not be happier. Their interests finally could meet between municipality, who was absent from there, and the identity movement. The activists looking for enhancing heritage of what they call from then on Little Africa of Rio, and the municipality was striving to integrate the place in the ongoing urban operation, therefore communicating for the first time on the value of heritage from Africa in the neighborhood, designing and implementing a cultural track called Circuits of the Memory of African Heritage, including places already existing, already under the resistance and the wishes of recognition from many people from the neighborhood without any success. And from now, of course, the municipality is addressing this and their role in the preservation of a subaltern cultural heritage. Soon, Afro-Brazilian identity was entering in the mainstream cultural agenda. What happened is the recipe of Barcelona we saw, where one of the main brilliant ideas was to build a museum of contemporary art in the heart of a popular locality called El Raval in Barcelona, is reproduced in Rio by the MAR, Museu de Arte do Rio, created under the urban operation by a trust led by one of the richest and families of Brazil, who helped the dictatorship also, and helped the recent coup d'etat, owned by the major media group of Globo. His name is Roberto Marinho. Its agenda, the agenda of this museum is elaborated as a tribute to the people of the neighborhood who provide the roots of cultural creation, said one of the curators of the exhibition on the locality held in 2013. Here you can see people coming from the port. Here you can see what you call Mãe de Santo, Mother of Saints, religious woman performing candomblé rituals in the neighborhood, and this as a cultural track of the museum. From then on, the municipality, supported by the state, clearly started to closely combine economic interests with contentious politics as a way to shut down the wave of a strong social movement happening against gentrification led by the urban operation. So, even if the claim for the space of memory has exceeded expectation, the conflict happening at the microscale level of Pedro Sal has not been displaced. Much on the contrary, the urban operation was still in 2016 reconfiguring the port zone. The municipality objective to secure the work in the neighborhood and in the favela especially, installed permanent policing, community police, process which largely failed. In that context, more than a gentrification process happening in the port zone, the area, and especially the Pedro do Sal and its articulation in the Wharf Valongo, tended to concentrate and face a heavy social climate I've been repeatedly trying to characterize. Of course, such processes relating to cultural and urban policies are very common and kind of successful in producing spaces. But what appears more peculiar is that it's concentrated at the same time, from then on, many different uses and practices. It came to be frequented by many activists, representative of housing movement, I said, but a strong pole of contest social order, a place inspiring utopia and resistance. But in the meantime, at the same time, it was integrating cultural agenda, regularly hosting samba show in the evening, attracting middle-class population and tourists, enhancing gastronomy of the place. The people originate from North Brazil cooking for samba shows, and such concentration of practices articulated also articulated also religion, identity, heritage, but also other practices I qualified as subversive or illegalism. Among them, bar tenants, being highly associated with drug dealers going down the hill of the favela, both to secure the place from the police in exchange of bribes, and to sell cocaine and marijuana to middle-class customers as a way to entertain, opening up new marketplace in the context of severe control in the favela. The production of a cultural space is also a production of another space of illegal practices, and as a matter of fact, if such practices are not specific to this place, once again, but they tend to express in new ways how gentrification process, promoting space of memory, are far from producing conflict-free spaces. The new actors disputing the Pedro do Sal, the Quilombo, either as a place of life, of commerce, of religious practices or entertainment, are interacting in new ways, strongly through the construct of the other's interest. The actors in game perform in the scenario, in the stage of Pedro do Sal, several evenings in the week, appear very from the initial dispute. Several facts tend to show, for example, the very tight links existing between two representatives of the church and the drug dealers. During the interviews I've been doing with my colleague Rafael, several residents share with us the fact that they have gone to the leader of drug dealers in the favela to complain of the pressure that were exercised on them by the upper priest of the church, accused of collecting bribes on the official rent. By way of reprisal, and maybe by solidarity to the black movement, the drug dealer required a financial counterparty to the church, otherwise they will denounce these practices to the police. Such situations tend also to silence the church, opening up the place for the drug dealers to exert their control, securing the place, assuming also a new ways their domination, both by replacing police forces to ensure security and selling freely drugs. Being asked why such practice was not resulting in any reaction or regulation from the municipality, state regulation, or from the government institution, a municipal officer responded to us that it was impossible, I quote, to engage with repression or even with a simple presence which could threaten the fragile balance sketched out in the region after the implementation of the urban operation, but especially after the claims of the Quilombo. Prolonging our interest to gather public reaction to such inactivity, a political leader shared his reticence to publicly address this question in the municipal assembly, as according to him, it would have consequences he couldn't face. This person was sitting in the municipal assembly, and his ex-wife, they were fighting since a long time, his ex-wife called and said, don't stay close to Damian Braga, which is the representative of the black movement in Rio, don't stay close to him. And then he turned to me, as I was assisting to the municipal assembly, and he told me, she didn't talk to me since 2 months, and now she called me, as an advice. So if such consideration should could be discussed as a way to represent an academic proof or testimony or empirical data or something else, as many other attesting or criminal practice or illegal practice, they are not to be considered as proof, but however, in the context of high tensions, it's the only way I could face to gather information, and also it's very, they could help to elaborate a tight interpretation of the senses of social experience in a particular place. And then could address the question of how informal politics effectively works. 2 minutes to conclude? Okay. So to briefly conclude, there are so many questions could raise by this case study. Once again, it's a case study, and it's a very limited amount of empirical data, but through a long period of observation. But I would like to insist on 3 main elements which are important to draw some further and more general perspective. First, this case shows how a set of cut-crossing processes tend to combine and turn very complex the understanding of how memorial legitimacy is built, produced in a highly valorized place. Crossing, therefore, question of heritage in rapid urbanization or in our rapid urban transformation. This is a very common subject, but I feel in India that it's very urgent to address directly this double process of rapid urbanization, land issues or land speculation, and heritage, which reveals also some of the interest. The very specificity of Pedro Rousseau dispute relates in fact on the fragility and the subjectivity of territorial claims and the fragility of the law that has to be understood as a practice to be analyzed through an anthropology of law, and that's how my colleague Raphael, which is an historian of the law, is slowly taking the law in his hands to address it as a set of practice, as an anthropology. It's also very specific due to the practical difficulty and the moral responsibility of the court of the justice to apply in an urban context a legislation based on the rural world. I said that, but in the rural world of Brazil, where family linkages tend to guarantee the right to land from both the progeny and the residents, which is not the case in the urban context. Then the Quilombo doesn't only rely on a spatial reclamation, it is more to be considered as a projection of identity, religion, but also as a projection of resistance. Then, as both tangible and intangible traces of an heritage, which is a place of implementing, where strategies could be implemented, such not considering heritage only as a set of elements of any value to a specific norm, which could be contexted in terms of its social captivity or social background or its aesthetic values, but rather a heritage as a resource, as a way to produce and address conflict, as a place where different strategies meet and challenge dominant powers. This aspect of heritage and culture and the public expression and the cultural economy it produces then are directly questioning the place of the middle class members, who are the public, who are the consumers of this heritage, of this conflict. They are alimenting the conflict while taking also advantage of it, but also helping to secure places where, since 2 or 3 decades, were impossible to go on in the night. So they are opening up new public space in the city. The question is not to be judging ourselves, as we are also involved in gentrification processes. So this has to be addressed as question very fragile and very tiny. But remembering what how the cities, and especially metropolises, as producing a fetishism for heritage and culture. This is a significant aspect in which people converging in the Federal South are involved. All of them are aware of the importance of these cultural shows. The songs of sambas are the testimony of a very ancient production of challenging the dominant powers, being colonial or post-colonial. That is to say, since its creation at the very core of a place which has been always discriminated and marginalized, at the heart of new powers, as a space of resistance, it is presented as a stage where mobilization, practice, and strategy are visible, as a symbolic reference of social and racial contestation, its control remaining object of the struggle. So the struggle may rely on very different legitimacy, on unbalanced powers and influence, and on very different norms that should require analysis based on multiple perspectives. The forces which cut across the field of urbanism and urban governance are then largely dominated by overlapping questions of identity, territoriality, and power. The overflow of illegal or informal practices are either able to threat the precarious balance of power, silence one or the other of the groups in opposition, or enhance the power of some actor involved in a place to orientate urban politics. In that way, urban politics works precisely within the field of urban decision-making. This question appears very important to be debated, especially now because I'm still very much interested in such processes in another context in India, and I would be very pleased to have some questions and critiques and further explanation. Thank you very much.